Hi, in this video we're going to look at some actual examples of some of the chromatic harmony from real pieces of music that we introduced last time. On the screen at the moment you can see something that you will have seen demonstrated in the previous video. It's just a descending scale of C major. We have a slightly different rhythm here. I'm going to play a harmonization of this in 4 voices. So you've been given the soprano, and can you therefore write down the alto, tenor and bass parts? And you'll notice that it begins in a rather perhaps unexpected way before ironing itself out and coming back to C major at the end. So you can replay this little stretch of video as many times as you like in order to write down the 3 lower parts. So here it comes. So again, please replay that as many times as you like as an oral exercise to see if you can complete the lower voices. Now I'm going to reveal what the progression consists of. And I've included the chord symbols. So you can see that we begin straight away in the first bar with a couple of chords that include F sharp and D sharp, 2 notes that clearly do not belong to C major. So we need to work out, well, what key could they possibly be taking us towards? And in fact, if we look at the first 3 chords, on their own, they feel like a 2/7B 5/1 into the key of E minor. But we don't stay in E minor. We're just, this is just a sort of false start, if you like, a sort of deceptive beginning before the music then irons itself out from this point onwards, taking us back to C. So we don't stay in E minor. It's just really a passing modulation, which is why I've used this notation for the chords with the slash, indicating that this first chord is 2/7B of E minor, or in other words, of 3. And this chord is a secondary dominant. It's the dominant 7th based on B, so it's the dominant of E, hence 5/7/3. You may think, well, this sounds vaguely familiar, and it probably is to a lot of you. This is basically a simplified form of a phrase from the famous Wedding March from Mendelssohn's music for A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I'm going to just pass down and show you the actual phrase. So I've restored the melody as you will recognize it, but essentially it's based on the progression that we've just heard. The bass line is exactly the same. So here's the original Mendelssohn. Okay, and you can see that the simple scale shape has been slightly adapted here, where the melody dips down to another note from the chord, and also here, where the melody again goes between 2 different notes from the same 2B chord. This moment here is worth just looking at in a little bit more detail. The bass has moved to E, resolving this sort of perfect cadence into E minor. But on the downbeat, notes from the previous chord have been held on to form what you might call a triple suspension or triple appoggiatura. The 4th, the 9th and the 7th are all sustained or kind of held on from the previous chord before they resolve onto the actual E minor chord, which is the next one there. So it just creates an extra kind of richness on that downbeat. Mendelssohn was working in the first half of the 19th century, and it's in the 19th century perhaps that we see quite a lot of the characteristic use of chromatic harmony that I'm going to be talking to you about in these few videos. And we're going to use Mendelssohn as an example in the next couple of pages on this worksheet. So I've got 2 more passages from orchestral music of Mendelssohn reduced to 2 staves, and we're going to treat them again as oral exercises. So we're going to look first of all at a passage from Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture. I have given you the complete melody on this page, and I've given you some of the harmony, but I've left some moments blank for you to try and write in, again, as an oral dictation exercise. So here we go. This is the Hebrides. I'll play it all the way through. You can replay the video as many times as you like to try and write in the missing harmonies, and then we'll reveal them and analyze them. Here we go. You probably realized that we started in D major and we finished in D major. In fact, that whole last line really is very comfortably analyzed as belonging in D. But there were some moments where we drifted away from the home key. So, assuming you've played this video as many times as you like, I'm now going to reveal the missing chords in the first line for us. Okay, and we can see that the very first move away from the tonic chord is in fact to something that is not diatonic to D major. So we go from a D chord into something that includes a D sharp. So look at this chord here. We've got B, B again. So we have a triad of B, B, D sharp and F sharp and an A as well. So all that tells us that we're actually dealing with a chord of B major with the 7th on it, the minor 7th. So that's a dominant 7th, and it's taking us into the key of E minor, the next chord here, with again one of these triple suspension figures that resolves eventually to a chord of E minor on the second beat. E, G, B, E. Here we go. So I'm going to just annotate this score with a little bit more information about these chords. So this chord is the dominant 7th of E minor, and E in relation to D is chord 2, isn't it? So that's the dominant 7th of E, and we resolve there onto E itself. Now, after the E minor chord, we get a C major chord followed by a G major chord. So now we seem to be moving away from that region of E minor. So we'll play it from here again. And I think you'll be able to hear that by the time we get to the start of this line, the G major chord feels like the new tonic. So we need to start thinking about how to recognize that in our understanding of what's going on here. So I'm going to start thinking about the music as now being in G major. And this is the point to introduce the notion of a pivot chord. In other words, a chord that can function in more than one tonality, and it acts as a bridge or a pivot between one key and another. So this chord that we've reached here, the E minor chord, it might be the tonic of E minor, but in relation to G major, it is chord 6, a submediate. And we have a fairly familiar kind of progression where we go through a falling third to a C major chord, that's chord 4, and then here we've got our G major chord in first inversion. And that progression is repeated with chord 4, eventually going to the G major chord 1 on the next line. So it's really quite a restless passage in terms of tonality. We start off in D, we wander through E minor, but E minor is only a stage on the way to G major. So I'll play that section. And now Mendelssohn very cleverly extends this phrase with something related but not identical. So I'll play this second stage of the melody from here. Again, you can hear by the time we get to the third line, we are clearly back in D major again, but some interesting things have been going on in this area. So I shall reveal what was missing in my original version here. And you can see, yet again, we have another chromatic chord in the second bar on that line. This time, if you look carefully, you can see F sharp is the root. We've got F sharp, A sharp, here's the C sharp, and here's an E. So again, it is a dominant seventh. It's the dominant seventh rooted on F sharp. Well, what is it the dominant of? It's the dominant of the next chord, B. Again, we have a suspension figure here. The A sharp, E, and C sharp all are carried over from the previous chord, and then they resolve on the second beat here to a B minor chord. Okay, so I'm going to write in the harmony here so you can understand that. So at this point, again, we have a secondary dominant. It is 5/7 belonging to a different key, 5/7 of B minor. Now, if we're in G major, then you need to think of B minor as in its relationship to G major. So B minor is the third degree of the scale. So it's 5/7 of 3. And then here we get to our chord 3. Okay. But yet again, this is only a stopping point on our way back to D major. So I'm going to, underneath what we've just had, show the kind of alternative tonality. In relation to D major, this B chord is submuted, again, chord 6. So we're in a situation not unlike what I've just shown you on the previous line. And from chord 6, we go through the same progression. We go to G major chords, that's chord 4. And from there we go to chord 1. And then back again, chord 4. And then on the next line, you can see the chord 1 in D major. Okay, so just comparing this line of the music with what's above it, we've got a similar kind of relationship, but a slightly different move from the first chord to the second one. Okay, so the two lines both go through this 6-4-1-4-1 pattern at the end of the line, but the initial movement is slightly different. So here we went from a D major chord to a B7, and here we went from a G major chord to an F sharp 7. Okay, I'm going to play the whole thing again to you, including its harmonic analysis. Okay, so very beautiful melody, and if you look at the melody itself, there are actually no chromatic notes within the melody, so it could have been harmonized in a much plainer fashion, but it becomes so much more expressive with these secondary dominants added that take us on a bit of a harmonic journey through different keys. My third example, and final one for this worksheet, this is also by Mendelssohn. It's also from A Midsummer Night's Dream, like the Wedding March. This is the Nocturne. I have not given you anything to try and write down, other than I want you to think about the chromatic chords and see if you can work out how they relate to the overall tonality. You can pause the video, replay it, and have a think about that before I go on to do the analysis. Okay, well, we're in the key of E major, and we begin with a passage that keeps coming back to an E pedal, a tonic pedal there, all the way through the first few bars. But the harmony has some elements of real richness to it. For example, on this downbeat here, we can see you've got the notes of a B chord, B, D sharp and F sharp, which have all been held over from the previous quaver, and they clash against this tonic pedal and then resolve. Again, in a way that we've seen Mendelssohn doing in the previous examples. And then at the end of the bar, we have a chromatic note, the D natural here. So the D natural is part of a chord that's got also E and B. So this gives us an interesting situation because we've got 3 notes out of what should be a 4-note chord. So you have to think, what would the implied 4th note be? Well, a little bit of working out should tell you that E is the root of the chord, and we would expect to have a G sharp as an additional note there. So E, G sharp, B and D natural forms a dominant 7th on E. So this is no longer just straightforwardly thinking of the E as the tonic, but it's now become the dominant of A. So in other words, this is a secondary dominant 7th here, and it's the dominant 7th of chord 4. So we could label this chord as 5/7 of 4. And that, in fact, is what the next chord is. It's an A major chord. We have A, C sharp, E, all over that E pedal. Okay, so that is an incomplete secondary dominant 7th chord at that point. Later on in the piece, on the second time bar, you can see another chromatic chord. And this time, the chromatic note is an A sharp, taking us towards obviously a sharper key. So looking at this chord, we can try and resolve that into root position. You should find that F sharp is the root, and then you have the 3rd is A sharp, the 5th is C sharp, and the 7th is E. And that chord in its totality forms an F sharp dominant 7th. So in other words, F sharp is the dominant of B, so it's a secondary dominant 7th again. It's 5/7 of 5, and it eventually resolves in the next bar onto our chord 5. And you can see again in the top part another example of a suspension. So the E is a suspended 4th that then resolves on the second beat to a B chord, and that is ultimately the B chord that's the resolution of the F sharp chord here. So I'll play from there. Okay, so at that point you've got interesting use of a unusual inversion of the dominant 7th chord there. It's in its second inversion, so the bass is allowed just to move down by a step, making a very smooth progression. We've got one more chromaticism in this bar, and you'll notice that at this point the inner voice makes a nice smooth descent from E through the D sharp to D natural on its way to the C sharp. So at this point we've got the notes of a B minor chord, So an interesting little chromatic inflection just to make a minor version of the dominant on our way into the chord 2, the F sharp minor chord here. So again, this is just giving us a little flavour perhaps of F sharp minor with the D natural before we finally have a perfect cadence into E. So I'll just play that example one more time, and that'll be the conclusion of this look at secondary dominants in action. Thank you for watching.